There are connections that defy logic. People cross our path and, in some inexplicable way, remain inside us, even at a distance, even after time has passed. It's as if an invisible thread keeps us bound, resisting breakups, misunderstandings, or even silence. When this feeling arises, it's common to question your own sanity. Why do I still think about this person? Why does it feel like this bond never dissolves? What many don't realize is that according to Carl Jung's analytical psychology, these ties are not merely emotional. They are psychic, archetypal, and deeply symbolic. They arise from layers of the soul we cannot see, yet feel with great intensity. And when this happens, it's not just you who notices. Your unconscious is trying to tell you something. If this connection feels unbreakable to you, write in the comments, "I acknowledge the depth of invisible bonds." From Jung's perspective, the profound connections we feel with certain people are expressions of the collective unconscious and psychic processes that go far beyond the rational surface. When a bond seems unbreakable, it can indicate the activation of an archetypal link born from inner content seeking expression. Jung observed that the most intense relationships, especially those marked by sudden attraction or inexplicable resonance, often involve unconscious projections, aspects of ourselves that we unknowingly place onto another. This phenomenon is closely tied to the shadow, the set of repressed traits within the psyche, and to the process of individuation, which is the integration of all aspects of the self. When we encounter someone who touches us deeply, we are, in fact, coming face to face with a forgotten part of ourselves. That person may represent our anima or animus, that is, the unconscious feminine aspect in a man or the unconscious masculine aspect in a woman. By projecting these images onto another, we forge a bond rich in meaning, one that seems to transcend time and space. These connections, therefore, are not romantic illusions or emotional fantasies. They are messengers of the unconscious, trying to guide us inward. Rather than attempting to sever the thread, Jung invites us to follow it, not necessarily toward the other person, but toward what they represent within us. In this sense, the bond is a symbolic mirror of the soul, revealing where we still need integration, maturation, and understanding. At some point in many human relationships, we feel that the bond transcends the boundaries of logic. It's as if the other person occupies a space inside us that has always been empty, waiting to be filled. This kind of intense, enduring connection often arises from a profound psychic mechanism Jung called projection. In Jungian terms, to project is to attribute to another traits, emotions, or parts of ourselves that we have not yet acknowledged as our own. It is not mere idealization, but an unconscious operation intended to show us what still requires integration. When we feel that someone completes us, or that their presence awakens something visceral, we are often seeing something of ourselves reflected. The power of that projection lies in the fact that it touches internal areas that have been repressed, forgotten, or never illumined by consciousness, and that deception serves a noble purpose. It is a symbolic invitation to self-knowledge. Jung noted that such projections tend to occur most intensely in relationships marked by strong emotional charge, such as sudden passions, impossible loves, or instant connections. In these cases, the other seems to carry a magnetism we cannot explain. This happens because they become a symbolic vessel for contents alive and active within us. The feeling of familiarity, of immediate intimacy, springs from the unconscious recognition that what we see is, in some way, part of ourselves, even if we have never consciously accessed that content. These connections are especially intense because they activate our complexes, autonomous psychic cores charged with emotion. A complex is like a living wound that pulses in the unconscious, seeking expression and recognition. When we project a complex onto someone, it takes shape, color, and life. That person comes to represent a point of internal tension, and the connection becomes a profoundly deep experience. The problem arises when we mistake that projection for the other person's objective reality. We forget that we are seeing a symbolic image and begin to react as if it were literal. It is at this point that projection ceases to be a portal and becomes a prison. The pain of not being reciprocated, the suffering of losing someone we felt was part of us, often has less to do with the other person and more to do with the collapse of the projected image. It's as if a mirror shatters, and with it we lose something of ourselves. Jung warned that recognizing the projection is the first step toward integration. Upon realizing that the force binding us to someone is actually revealing a part of our psyche, we can withdraw the projected content and embark on a profound process of healing and self-discovery. It's important to remember that not every projection must be withdrawn immediately. Some are necessary for the unconscious to manifest and prepare us for later integration. However, prolonged suffering, feelings of emotional dependence or obsession with the other are signals that a projection has ceased to fulfill its symbolic role and is preventing our growth. In such cases, it is essential to step back and examine what is truly being mirrored. Projection is not a mistake. It is an archetypal movement guiding us inward. It reveals what we do not yet know about ourselves, using the other as messenger. And when the connection seems unbreakable, perhaps what is truly bound is not the relationship itself, but the symbolic link between who we are and what we still need to integrate. It is in that invisible space that the deepest connections form, not merely between two people, but between different parts of the same soul. Among the most transformative concepts in Jung's analytical psychology are the archetypes of the anima and animus, representations of the unconscious feminine in a man and the unconscious masculine in a woman. These psychic aspects not only influence our behaviors and desires, but also quietly act as inner guides toward wholeness. When we feel an intense connection that seems impossible to break, we are often witnessing a profound activation of these archetypes. In this context, the other person becomes the bearer of a powerful inner image that attracts and hypnotizes, not just for who they are, but for what they symbolize. To Jung, the anima and animus are pointers of the unconscious, indicating areas of the soul that need discovery. A man, upon meeting a woman who embodies his anima, experiences an almost magical enchantment. She seems to hold the key to his deepest feelings, awakening a sensitivity that had lain dormant. Likewise, a woman encountering a man who carries her animus may feel that he embodies a force, direction, or wisdom she lacks. The bond that forms in these encounters is more than love. It is a kind of archetypal fascination that binds not through affection, but through mystery. This is why such bonds become so hard to break. We are not only relating to an external person, but to an internal symbol that has assumed shape and face. The pain of separation, when these relationships end or become inaccessible, is so intense because it feels as if we are being torn from something essential within ourselves. The other becomes a receptacle for what our soul longs to integrate. When we part from them, we feel as though a vital part of our being is being ripped away. The problem worsens when we fail to recognize this archetypal dynamic and begin to demand from the other what we should be seeking within ourselves. A man may expect a woman to permanently embody his inner muse, ignoring her humanity. A woman may project onto a man the image of an infallible guide, denying his flaws and limitations. In this cycle, both become trapped in idealizations that breed frustration, dependency, and pain. The bond remains, but it stops being liberating. It becomes an emotional prison. Jung proposed that the path of individuation passes through acknowledging and integrating the anima and animus. This does not mean rejecting intense bonds, but understanding them as living symbols of internal processes. Once we realize that the person we cannot forget represents one of our psychic aspects, the bond begins to transform. Pain gives way to awareness, and dependency makes room for inner autonomy. The other no longer needs to bear the projection. They can simply be seen as they are. More importantly, we can start to cultivate within ourselves what we previously sought outside. The anima invites us to listen, to be sensitive, to open ourselves emotionally. The animus calls us to action, to clarity, and to structured thought. These elements exist in all of us, regardless of gender, and their integration is essential for us to become whole beings. When a bond does not dissolve, it is because it carries something that has not yet been lived, acknowledged, or transformed. That persistence is not a sign of emotional weakness, but of an inner work still in progress. Therefore, rather than fighting the connection or forcing ourselves to forget it, the invitation is to investigate what it reveals about our inner world. Which part of me did this person activate? What psychic image do they represent? What in me has yet to be recognized that this relationship is trying to bring to light? Answering these questions with honesty and depth initiates the rescue of the symbol behind the presence and paves the way for true inner transformation. The relationships that affect us most deeply are not only those of love or profound connection, but also those in which conflicts, pains, rejections, or contradictory feelings emerge. These intense experiences, which often leave marks for years, are portals to one of Jung's most fundamental dimensions of the human psyche, the shadow. This concept encompasses all aspects of ourselves that have been excluded from consciousness. Traits, desires, impulses, and fears we deem unacceptable and therefore repress. But banishing these parts does not render them inactive. On the contrary, the shadow, when ignored, projects itself onto others, especially those with whom we establish deep emotional bonds. When someone awakens intense feelings in us, whether extreme admiration, irresistible attraction, or disproportionate anger and repulsion, we are likely facing an encounter with our own shadow. The strength of the emotional reaction is the primary indicator that something unconscious has been touched. Instead of dealing with that content within ourselves, the psyche projects it onto the other, and we come to perceive them as the sole bearer of what is, in fact, ours as well. In connections that seem unbreakable, the shadow often manifests powerfully. A person may embody everything we fear becoming, or everything we secretly wish to be but deny out of fear, guilt, or insecurity. They may represent our suppressed boldness, our denied sensuality, our contained rage, or even our longing for freedom. Thus, even when the relationship turns toxic or painful, it is almost impossible to walk away. The soul unconsciously recognizes that there is something valuable there, something that needs to be seen for us to become complete. Jung believed that integrating the shadow is an essential step on the path of individuation, the process of becoming truly ourselves. But that integration does not happen through rational or superficial means. It requires courage to look inward and admit that what we hate in another may exist in us, that what we blindly admire might be a quality we possess but have not yet developed, and that the relationships that challenge us most are actually symbolic opportunities to shed light on what was previously hidden. Often when we feel unable to detach from someone, it's because that person has brought forth aspects of our shadow we have never confronted. They force us to deal with feelings we don't command: jealousy, possessiveness, insecurity, or even an intense desire for control. This is not a mistake, it is an invitation. The bond becomes a mirror reflecting not just the other, but also everything we avoid in ourselves. It is common in this process for defense mechanisms to arise. We justify the other's behavior, blame ourselves, or try to save the relationship at all costs. These movements stem from the fear of facing what the connection is truly showing us, that it's not only about the other person, but about ourselves. True liberation will not come through forgetting or fleeing, but through consciously accepting what this relationship has taught us about the parts we need to embrace. By integrating the shadow, the relationship changes. The bond may dissolve naturally because the lesson has been learned, or the connection may continue, but in a more lucid and balanced way. What matters is that the energy once projected becomes available for inner growth. What once seemed destructive transforms into strength, clarity, and personal power. The shadow ceases to be a hidden enemy and becomes an ally in the process of psychic maturation. Therefore, when a connection insists on remaining, even when all signs point to its end, it may be time to ask, what is this person revealing about me? Which part of myself have I not yet accepted? What do I need to embrace in order to stop repeating this pain? The answer may not come immediately, but the very act of posing these questions initiates a process of profound healing. And on this path, the shadow ceases to frighten and begins to guide. At the heart of Jung's analytical psychology lies the idea of individuation, the ongoing process of becoming who we are, integrating all aspects of the psyche toward a unified center. Individuation is not a linear path, nor free of challenges. On the contrary, it is marked by intense encounters, emotional crises, ruptures, and connections that defy reason. Among these experiences, inexplicable relationships play a central role. They serve as psychic catalysts, forcing us to confront, integrate, and transcend parts of ourselves that lay dormant. When someone enters our life and provokes deep emotional upheaval, that bond almost always carries an essential symbolic function in our process of self-transformation. Jung did not see relationships as mere social or affective ties, but as genuine symbolic arenas. Each meaningful encounter is both a mirror and a challenge. Connections that persist against logic are often manifestations of an internal movement seeking balance. These people arrive as disguised teachers, bringing aspects of our psyche that need to be observed, felt, and understood. And no matter how much the rational mind tries to explain, resolve, or rid itself of the bond, the unconscious persists. There is something there that has yet to be experienced. Individuation demands that we integrate not only what we consider beautiful or desirable in ourselves, but also what we reject, deny, or do not know. It is a journey of expanding consciousness that inevitably passes through experiences of great emotional intensity. The relationships that unsettle us, pull us off center, or evoke a sort of calling are fundamental to this journey. They bring to light archetypal contents that would otherwise remain latent, and by doing so, they force us out of psychic comfort. Throughout this process, we discover that what we most seek in another, whether love, security, inspiration, strength, or freedom, are, in reality, qualities and potentials that need to be awakened within us. The person who touches us deeply is often the living symbol of what we have not yet realized internally. It is not uncommon, for example, to feel that the other completes us, but that feeling reveals precisely an internal incompleteness still needing work. The connection then becomes an invitation to integration, recovering what we projected outward so it can be recognized as our own. The most challenging aspect is that in this process, suffering often serves as a guide. The pain of absence, unreciprocated affection, breakup, or frustrated idealization is not mere emotional accident. It is an expression of the ongoing psychic work. Jung saw pain as a messenger of the soul, indicating that something is demanding to emerge. To ignore, anesthetize, or hastily overcome that pain is to squander the opportunity to understand what the unconscious is revealing. It is here that many lose their way. They believe they must forget the other to move on, but the true movement of individuation is not forgetting, but assimilation. The other, as symbol, needs to be integrated. This does not mean staying in the relationship or nurturing unrealistic expectations, but understanding the role that person played in our inner journey. Which part of me did they activate? What transformation did they provoke? How am I different after that encounter? These questions are keys to opening the doors of consciousness. Many of the most inexplicable relationships, even those that never fully materialize, exist for this purpose, to serve as the initial impulse for a psychic awakening. Sometimes the mere presence of the other, however brief, is enough to trigger an internal revolution. The intensity of the bond is not necessarily linked to its duration, but to the symbolic content it carries. And once this is understood, the bond can be honored without needing to be sustained. It ceases to be an emotional knot and becomes a landmark on the soul's journey. The process of individuation does not seek to eliminate bonds, but to transcend them in consciousness. It teaches us that no one comes into our life by chance, especially those who leave profound marks. Each relationship that transforms us is a piece of the soul's great mosaic, and when we look upon these connections through the lens of depth psychology, we stop feeling like victims of fate and begin to recognize that everything, even the inexplicable, has a broader, deeper meaning. The bond remains, but now as symbol, not as prison. And with this we move forward, more whole, more lucid, more ourselves. The connections that seem unbreakable are neither delusions of the heart nor traps of the mind. They are living expressions of the unconscious, symbolic calls to dive deeper into ourselves. Throughout this journey, we have seen how projection, the anima and animus, the shadow, and the individuation process intertwine in relationships that defy logic and remain alive despite time, distance, or silence. They do not exist to bind us to others, but to free us from all that we have yet to know within ourselves. Every bond, however painful or confusing it may seem, carries a function to reveal, to illuminate, to transform. If you feel this content has touched something within you, it is a sign that your soul is ready to take another step toward integration. Therefore, do not ignore what you feel, investigate it, and remember, what we cannot forget almost always has something to teach us. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-knowledge based on Jung's psychology, and click on the video on the screen to deepen this process even further. Your transformation begins the moment you decide to listen to what your psyche is trying to tell you.